based on what I learned from overcoming my own. So what you were saying, the point is well taken, that yeah, what we can learn from, we can then apply to the next time. And then sometimes you take those applications and those ideas and you help others with it. You help others who are going through the same thing. And I think that to me is the most amazing thing we can do with the challenges we overcome, is then reach down and pull others up. That's what we can do. We can help other people overcome those challenges too, and that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Adapt You podcast. Super pumped to have on the show an amazing guest who's going to teach us about change for businesses and individuals. Somebody by the name of Izolda Trakhtenberg. I'm happy I did not screw that name up because that was a difficult one for me to learn. Izolda Trakhtenberg on the show today is going to be a phenomenal guest. You do not want to miss it. Before running her own business, Izolda traveled the world as a NASA master trainer, transforming people's perspectives on our planet through a mindful teaching process. She's released 4 books on communication, collaboration, and self-improvement. Izolda helps people and companies find their voices and become cohesive, focused teams. Through her work, those who work with her will coalesce and become a focused unit. They can get inspired to solve problems creatively, be more innovative, and take part in company conversation, which is super important as you hear she discusses it. Some will also find and develop leadership skills as a natural outcropping of the work that she'll do together with you and your group. She has and uses a formula called the 3 C's as a major driver in her program, something that we'll talk about today in great length and something you can take with you exiting the show and apply to your life and enough to grow businesses and to grow yourself. Nowadays, you'll find her speaking at conferences, traveling the world, or singing in front of hundreds of people, all the while interviewing peak performers on creative leadership, innovation, mindfulness on her podcast, The Innovative Mindset, a podcast that is booming right now. I strongly encourage you to listen to it. And it's a twice weekly dedicated show to mindful innovation and collaboration. So that said, let's get Izolda on the show. All right, everybody, welcome Izolda to the show. Izolda, is an absolute honor and privilege to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek. I appreciate it.
So Izolda right now is in the midst of a move. She's out of the Brooklyn, New York area. Does that make you a Yankee fan? Are you more of a Mets fan, or could you care less?
Well, neither actually. I'm a recent transplant from the DC area, so I've
You're
sort
a
of
Nats
I'm
fan.
yeah, kind of. If I'm gonna go
Yeah.
there, that's where I'm gonna go.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. So the Bronx and the Brooklyn area hasn't broken you down into diehard Yankee fan yet?
Not quite yet, but I have people who are working on it
Oh,
diligently.
that's that's good. That's good. Give them some time. We'll slowly break you down.
That's right.
So Izolda, as I mentioned in the introduction, you have an incredible story in terms of what your upbringing and how you got to where you are today, and the services and the value that you provide to so many people, individuals, and companies out there to really inspire massive change. And what's fascinating about it, and I want you to spend some time sort of just talking about your upbringing, where it all started, and kind of walk through some of the struggles that you went through as a child, and how that brought you to where you are today.
Wow. Tiny question there. Very small. Well, uh, it's my background is somewhat unusual. I was born in the former Soviet Union in what is now known as Moldova. So I was born in what they call communist Russia, if you will. So my first few years were living in a communist regime where there were very few freedoms, where if you were creative, for example, you were only creative by what they decreed was allowed. And like many people from that part of the world, alcoholism ran rampant all around us. And there's a lot of good in my father, I will say, and there's a lot of challenging stuff. He was abusive, and members of my family ended up in the hospital a lot, things like that.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it has its own trials and tribulations, but also if you emerge pretty victorious, and I think that's one of the lessons I took away from my childhood. We immigrated to the USA when we left when I was 6. We spent a year living in lots of different countries, and then when I was 7, we finally arrived in the USA. after having lived in a war zone for a few months in Israel, because immigration was not possible between the Soviet Union and the USA directly. So you had to go through pieces. And we spent time in 1973, October of 1973, during the Yom Kippur War. We were there. So I got very good at getting down to the bomb shelter. It was one of those
Oh,
processes.
wow.
So you had to do that. And then once we arrived here, we were placed in Michigan because the immigration authorities sort of say, well, what do you do? And my father uh, prevaricated, I will say, and said that he had a mechanical engineering degree and he never went to college. He's a genius, but not a good person, if you will. And he never went to college, but said he was a mechanical engineer, and so they placed us in Detroit, and that's where I grew up. Went to the University of Michigan, and then as soon as I graduated, hightailed it to DC.
Wow. So, I mean, just the fact that most 6, 7 year olds don't have to go the process of jumping down into to bomb shelters while you're in Israel during that time. How long were you there again, having to manage and deal with that in that war zone and type of
Uh,
environment?
Roughly 8 months between April and December
What was that
of that
like?
year.
I mean, I know that was a while ago. You were a young child. Did you still have pretty vivid memories of what that was like living in that environment?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's not something you're going to forget. And anybody who's lived in a war zone, it's indelible. So, the things that I remember clearly were there would be airplanes flying overhead, and bombs would drop, and things like you had to paint your headlights black or blue so that planes flying overhead could not see your car if you were driving at night. Things like that were very important. You know, you had to be very aware of where you were and who you were with. And even as a 6, 7 year old, you become uh, not a nerd, but you definitely become aware and cognizant of the fact that this is not play. This is potentially dangerous. And we had to do what we had to do. And everybody who finds themselves in that kind of situation, this is a podcast about adaptation, and it is sort of an adapt or die situation. You cannot take these things flippantly. You have to be serious about it. And even as children, we learned that pretty clearly, that this was a dangerous time and we were living in a precarious situation every day.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I haven't had to go through anything like that, or really known anybody who had to live in that type of an environment as a child. Be it for a relatively short period of time. That's still enough to put a stamp or an imprint into your mind, and condition you as a young child to adapt to a challenging situation. And then you go from there to Michigan, which is like this goes from like you're in a war-stricken war zone, right, into an area that's were you in Detroit, like down in the city, or were you sort of out in the burbs when you got to Michigan with the trees and the squirrels and all of that?
Right in the temperate zone, if you will. We were literally across the street from Detroit where I grew up, crossed over. And, you've probably heard the movie 8 Mile. Well, I
Hmm.
lived right there. So
Okay.
we were in a sort of a transitional zone, if you will, between a more suburban area and a little bit more of the rough and tumble Detroit that has that reputation. Detroit itself is a great city. It's a great town, and I grew up in it, so that's all I knew. And there was nothing. Uh, there wasn't. Yes, I got mugged. Yes, things like that happened, but there wasn't anything that was so dangerous all the time to me that it didn't feel like it had in Israel, for example. It was much more, you lived your life, and that was how it was.
I guess it's all relative, right?
Exactly.
To some living in that section near the 8 Mile and sort of the right on the edges and the outskirts of a rough and rugged Detroit might be their version of war-stricken Israel. But since you were there first, it probably felt like Disneyland, a little bit, right?
I
Relative to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. You definitely get used to what your environment is. You
Hmm.
adapt, and that's what a lot of immigrants did. My family was the first immigrant family in that area, so I had a very my interesting part of that was that I picked up languages very quickly. English is actually my fourth language, and I picked up languages very quickly. And so what they would do is they would drive me to whenever a new Russian speaking family would come into the school district, I would get picked up and driven over to the school district to be the interpreter between the parents and the school administration. So I was 7 years old getting in the cars and getting driven to the place where I would be the interpreter.
7-year-old interpreter. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because
Wow.
I spoke English and Russian, and so that was they were like, "Oh, we can use her." And
For sure.
so
Yeah. Wow.
nowadays I'd be getting paid big bucks for that, but back then I didn't realize I could charge for it.
So you just did that free of charge, basically.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we
Yeah.
didn't know. This was just something they asked me to do. My parents signed off on it, and off I went.
Yeah. And so what was it like? So you speak 4 languages now, or more than 4 languages?
I speak a smattering of a bunch, but I Russian was first, Hebrew was second, Italian was third, English was fourth, Spanish was fifth. So
Wow.
I can still speak Russian and Spanish and occasionally English, but mostly, yeah, that's
I mean,
mostly
your English sounds
Zoldyck.
good to me.
Thank you.
It sounds just fine to me. In fact, I sense no presence of an accent either, which is I'm surprised. I know you've been in the States for quite some time, but still, that's it's impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's just because when you're that between, before you're the age of 12, they say you soak up languages. And I came here when I was 7 and the immigration authorities sort of said at that point in the 70s, you must adapt, you must acclimate and align yourself with everything American and sort of don't remember, don't pay attention to whatever culture you had before, which is I think a little different now. People are more encouraged to hold on to their culture, but back then it was very much acclimate to the USA. So I stopped speaking Russian pretty quickly
Hmm.
and only spoke in English. And so English came other than the strange rules English has, because English is just full of really bizarre rules,
Yep.
it became pretty easy to speak the language because that was all I was doing.
Was your family speaking that language at home, or were they speaking Russian at home?
Well, what they would do is they would speak to me in Russian and I would answer in English. So
Well, there you go. That's good. Um, uh, so, it sounds like you adapted pretty quick. And it was almost something that was encouraged, in order to acclimate and assimilate into the U.S. culture. And what was that like? Was that difficult to let go of that Russian side of you as you sort of came into the U.S. or at such a young age were you malleable enough to that it seemed like somewhat of a seamless transition from you, almost just moving from point A to point B within your own country?
no, I mean, I think things were very, very different. Certainly, a lot of holdovers. Don't trust anybody. Don't make any waves. Don't speak out of turn. Were definitely things that were encouraged by my parents when I first came. When we
Okay.
first came to the USA, there was definitely that because they had a fear that there would be uh, governmental reprisals if we were to speak out or speak up or anything like that. So it was different, and it took some getting used to the fact that there are just so many more freedoms in this country than there were in any other place I'd actually lived. But the other part of it, I think, is that when you are again that young, for me, it was kind of an adventure. I we lived in it after Israel, we lived in Italy for 2 months, and so I got used to I guess it must be at least a little bit like what military brats feel because
Hmm.
they move around so much. You get used to new places, new people, and you learn how to make friends and, find adventure and fun and things that interest you and be creative wherever you are.
I wholeheartedly agree. As a child myself, I was not a military brat, but my father had just a sequence of promotions
Mm,
throughout his career, which had us move east to west coast like I think like 5 or 6 times.
mm,
So we bounced back and forth, and the culturally, like the East Coast and the West Coast, is, I mean, still to this day, it's very different.
mhm,
And as a kid growing up, going through those weird, awkward high school, pimple face sort of times in your life, it was challenging. It was hard. I got picked on, and
mm,
I had to adjust and adapt, but with every time it happened, I got better at it, right? I was
Right.
forced into that situation. I had to learn how to change and adapt because if I didn't, I was going to be miserable, right?
Right.
And it's really a huge premise of what I think change is all about is just understanding the process
Mm.
and understanding, hey, I've been here, I've done this. So after you did it once, right, it seems a little bit easier doing it again, right? So putting ourselves in some of those intentional situations to force change so that when change is thrown about us, right, where we have to move now from Italy to Israel or Israel to the US, it is, you're more in tune with it, right? It's like, I've done this, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? So, and it's good to see that you went through that. And I'm sure that's probably prepared you through some of the challenges that you face in your life today as it relates to assimilating and into groups of complete strangers.
Oh, I think so. I think very much that you do, and I agree with you. You do adapt, and you can build on what you've experienced before, and sometimes they're painful experiences and challenging experiences,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't call them growing pains for nothing, right? So that's
Exactly.
a lot of what ends up happening. And it's interesting, you some of the experiences that happened, I too was picked on, and in fact developed a huge public speaking phobia when I was in elementary school here in the US already. And through various reasons was became terrified to stand up in front of people and speak. And
Most people are,
yeah,
but yours sounds like it was developed quite well.
yeah, it flew. And yet when I sort of overcame the phobia and figured out how to do that, I wrote a book on it. I wrote the actually, I don't know if you can see it. There's a little
I
book
can see
called
it.
Speak from Within.
Speak within. Yes.
Speak from Within. Yeah. So that book was all about how to engage and motivate and excite the people you're speaking with, public speaking, conversations, presentations, whatever, based on what I learned from overcoming my own. So what you were saying, the point is well taken that yeah, what we can learn from, we can then apply to the next time. And then sometimes you take those applications and those ideas and you help others with it. You help others who are going through the same thing. And I think that to me is the most amazing thing we can do with the challenges we overcome is then reach down and pull others up. That's what we can do. We can help other people overcome those challenges too, and that's what makes it all worthwhile.
It's the very reason why I do this podcast.
Yeah.
I went through challenges of my own, saw the light, so to speak, and realized the importance of change. And
Mm.
it's for that very reason that it motivates me to bring amazing guests on like yourself to be able to just give tidbits and nuggets of knowledge to help people through the same process and to see the light on their own. So I couldn't agree with you more. And it's and I want to talk about your speaking book and overcoming that fear
Mm.
and sort of how you got there. But I want to back up for just a second and continue on your story. I think we got you through college.
Mhm.
You graduated. You said University of Michigan,
Mhm. Mhm.
correct? And where'd you go from there?
Right after I graduated, I moved to DC with $23 in my pocket and stayed there for many, many years. Yeah, I ended up getting to work in some of the most amazing places. I worked at the National Geographic Society for a number of years, and after that, I spent about 20 years at NASA. And
And what were you
folk
doing at these places?
always about education and always about teaching other people, especially students, about the Earth and Earth systems. So in the National Geographic Society, I mean, they're all about the world and the planet and all of these amazing things. So I worked on something called Kids Network, which was a wonderful science program. And then when I went to NASA, I did the same thing. I worked for a soil scientist. I think I was telling you this before we started
Hmm.
recording this chat that we're having. I worked in soil science education and I got to travel the world, all over the world, doing these workshops, teaching students and scientists and teachers the protocols that were developed. And it's a really cool program. It was actually envisioned by Al Gore in his book, Earth in the Balance. And check this out, it is a partnership among scientists, students, and teachers where the scientists come up with these protocols, these earth science protocols, looking at water, the water bodies around them, or the soil, or the trees and plants, or the atmosphere, the kinds of clouds we have, all of that. And then these science protocols can then be done by students all over the world. And here's what's cool
Mm.
about this: the scientists can't do that science themselves. Why? Because they can't get to every spot in the globe. But we have schools everywhere. And so more than 110 countries participate in this program. And the kids are out there doing this science, real science, that's then usable. The data from that is put in a central database, and anybody in the world who wants to look at that science and see what the data says can do research, can learn more about their local environment, can learn about what's going on the other side of the planet. All sorts of things can happen because of this program and others like it. But this is the one that I worked for. And it's fascinating because one of the cool things that happens, and this is me with my multicultural everything, if you're in Australia and you want to know the difference in the kinds of clouds that you're seeing in May between you in Australia, let's say you're in Melbourne, and somebody in Denver, Colorado, you can partner with a school in Denver, Colorado, and you can compare data and you can get to know each other's cultures while doing that. But then you can also do science on that and really learn about it. And then, even better, you can communicate it to everybody in the world about the different kinds of things that you, a fourth grader, have learned. So it's really incredible, this way of reaching out and connecting with people all over the world, but then also communicating the cool things you've learned.
That's phenomenal. What a great way to aggregate data. But by the same
Mm.
time, you're teaching, somebody, a student, a young child, helping them gain interest in science and that. I assume that's what you did. You went to these places and taught these schools how to do this. Am I correct in saying that?
Some of it I was in school, some of it we were doing workshops to teach teachers
Ah,
and sometimes diplomats, because it was always a diplomatic sort of agreement that a country like, uh, let's say Argentina, who wanted to join, they had the U.S. State Department and their version, Argentina's version of that, made a bilateral agreement that they could participate in the program. And then
mm.
once they're participants, then we had to train the teachers, but also some of the scientists, not in the sort of the science because they knew that, but the specific protocols, which were highly vetted. So lots of scientists took part in figuring all of that out. What would the science be like, so that the data are valid, right? You want this to be something that is usable
Usable.
by everybody.
That's super cool. And it sounds like, given this was so multinational, and you stated earlier, you had this grand opportunity to see the world.
Hmm.
What was that like? I
I
love travel. We travel a ton. Travel is life to me. So I'm always fascinated by those who are able to share in that experience.
I love traveling. I love meeting new people, learning about new cultures. Love, 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 love it. And I got to travel to Central Asia. I got to travel to South Africa. I got to travel to Northern Europe, like Estonia. I got to travel to all over the USA, except for Hawaii. That's my one state I haven't yet traveled to. But I got to travel. I was very lucky in that I got to travel all over the world. And what was really cool about these workshops is that they wouldn't just say, oh, you're going to be in Kyrgyzstan. We're only going to have Kyrgyzstani teachers here. No, when we were in Kyrgyzstan, we had teachers from all over Central Asia. And when we
Very
were in South
cool.
Africa, we had people from Namibia, we had people from Kenya, we had people from Egypt. So it didn't, lots and lots of different people working together from different countries, different cultures, but all with one goal, which was to help these students learn about their local environments, but also know much more about the cultures and the environment of the whole planet.
It's amazing how it just sort of brings a culmination of your ability to now speak in front of people, as well as your vast knowledge of multiple different languages, sort of coming together and allowing you to experience that type of job, which it sounds phenomenal. I mean, it's,
It was amazing.
and then, so from there, where did you go from there? Because I know you've continued to grow in your journey here.
Well, along all of this, I am a musician and a
Mhm.
writer, and I performed everywhere. And one of the things that started happening at all of those NASA workshops, when they figured out I could sing and sing in lots of languages, they would have me sing in sometimes in Russian, sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in Japanese, sometimes in Italian, whatever it is, whatever countries were represented, they'd be like, Izolda, how about something in Japanese? Okay, I can sing in Japanese. So So I've been singing this whole time and performing this whole time, in part because it feeds me creatively like nothing else. So after I stopped my work with NASA, and that was full time, it was 2003, but I kept doing contract work for them because they kept asking me back, which was really sweet and wonderful. But I spent time as a full time musician from the early aughts to relatively recently. I still play out, but obviously COVID has eaten into the ability of playing out somewhat. So I've been doing music and also teaching workshops on, it's called, the workshop specifically with singing is called Work in Harmony, and what that is I go into organizations and companies and help them unlock their creative genius and also
Mhm.
team build at the same time by getting them singing together. So I might walk into a room where there are 150 people, many of whom go, "I don't sing. I will never sing." And 2 hours later, I walk out and they've sung in three-part harmony all together. So that's sort of a really nice way of building that kind of confidence, and also the amazing surprises people can have when they didn't think they could sing, but find out that absolutely they can, and their voices are glorious, and they all work together to create this joyful noise in one organization or one company. It's really mind-boggling how that transformation can change not just the individual person, but the entire dynamic of the whole group.
I love it. So your career is taking you to a place where you've had to use incredible communication skills, and also your creativity, which I know is two of the three C's, as it relates to a big part of what you do,
Mhm.
and which I love. So tell me a little about what you're doing now. You know, what your organization does now, and the value you provide to individuals and to businesses. You sort of already just touched on a little bit, but let's dive into that. That's where I want to spend a good bit of time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for asking, Derek. That I appreciate it. The thing for me with the 3 Cs, which are creativity, compassion, and collaboration, they are in many ways, to me anyway, the foundation of how we grow and how we achieve any sort of innovation. Because, like, I was talking to John Ko, who's an amazing, they call him Mr. Creativity and a serial innovator. He's incredible. And I was talking to him the other day, and we were talking about the fact that an innovator is sort of a creative with a to-do list, you know? It's
Hmm.
somebody who, you're not creating just to create when you're innovating, you're creating because you want to solve a problem. And so when I work the 3 Cs workshops in organizations and also help people with it, we spend time on each of those prongs. The creative prong, it is about accessing your own, as I said, creative genius. We all have something that we think or do that nobody else in the world does, because we're all individuals and we all have our unique perspectives. But often we let that go. We think that we can't, or that we shouldn't, or life gets in the way of art, as my Aikido sensei says. And so we're in that place of having to find what is going to be that spark, but we don't know. And so when I start with anything, I often go back to what we did when we were kids, and I'll ask that question of anybody I do a workshop in or with. What'd you like to do when you were a kid? Did you draw? Did you tell stories? Did you bang a wooden spoon on pots? What was the thing that got you excited? And a lot of times you'll see that thread into your adult life. Now, I desperately wanted to be an astronaut, for example. Desperately. I still want to see the Earth from outside the atmosphere. I really do. But I have terrible eyes and flat feet, and I was never going to be an astronaut. So I ended up working at NASA. Now that is a nice thread, so that yeah, I wanted to be an astronaut and I wasn't an astronaut, but there are ways to apply that dream, that creative aspect of who I am, right to the work I did at NASA. So creativity can be, you are a painter, but creativity can also be, what is your unique gift that you can bring to whatever it is you're doing? And that unique gift happens when we pay attention to it. And there's something really key to me about that. I've been increasingly fascinated by the instant of inspiration even before we verbalize it, but that aha moment, the before you even go, I know what, let's try, there's something in us that either accepts that creative impulse or rejects it. And I am on a mission to get us all to start accepting those creative impulses and seeing where they lead us. So that's the creative part of a lot of what I'm doing right now, is accessing that with people.
Why do you think people, and I completely wholeheartedly agree with that moment in time where we have an idea or a spark. And some people, I happen to be, I would consider myself a very creative person because, and only because when that point comes in you know, that moment in time comes to me, I speak it out or I seek it out or I write it down. It
Right.
manifests, right?
Hey.
Where those who are would self attest and say, I'm not a creative person, they stop, right?
Hmm.
And what do you think it is? Like, because I can't relate. I assume it's fear that is stopping people. Fear of judgment or persecution, or fear of failure of whatever their creative idea is. Maybe teeing it up in a meeting, like, oh, they'll probably people will think that's stupid, you know, something like that. What do you think stops people from being creative? If we all have it in us, what stops those from getting it out?
I think there are a couple of different things. Certainly, I agree with what you're saying about how a lot of us just going to go, oh, they won't like it. And we let the fear stop us for sure. And that's part of it. Part of it is circumstances. There are people who are obviously just working their patooties off trying to put food on the table, and you have to take care of that hierarchy of needs first. So
Of course.
we have to sort of honor that. But a lot of it is it's a self-worth issue. You have to remember that your ideas are worth hearing, and they're also worth hearing by you, right? That's a lot of what this is. It's a self-confidence thing. It's knowing that what you're thinking, what bubbled up out of your subconscious has value, even if you don't necessarily go and shout it out to the world, it still
Hmm.
has value. I encourage everybody to shout it out into the world, because when we're doing brainstorming for coming up with solutions to issues and challenges and problems in a company, when I'm doing a workshop with them, I want people to shout things out, because you never know when something someone shouts out will spark something either in them or in the people in their group.
Somebody else, yeah,
Yeah.
true.
So there's a lot of that to it. It's having the confidence to listen to that little voice. And I firmly believe that our subconscious knows everything, right? Every experience we've ever had, everything we've ever paid attention to, it's buried in our subconscious. Even if we don't consciously know about it or remember it now, our subconscious is doing a really great job when we're dreaming of bubbling ideas up, things like that. So to me, those little sparks are our subconscious kind of whispering to us, hey, this is something you're going to want to pay attention to. And the more we do that, the more we elevate our it's such a buzzword, but it's a consciousness thing. It's being conscious of, cognizant of what's possible. And so often we sort of push down what's possible because of these things that you and I've just discussed. But
Hmm.
also, we have to the best way I can say it is, you have to prioritize creativity. You have to make it important to yourself. So do I need to check, I don't know, TikTok or Instagram or whatever, or can I spend these next 5 minutes writing or drawing
Hmm.
or doodling or something where I'm working that creative part of myself? Because I think it's a muscle. I think the more we do it, the stronger it gets, and the more we pay attention to it, the more it will produce for us.
It's amazing. Yeah, creativity is such a huge part of. I mean, if you think about it, anything we see started as an idea in someone's mind, right?
Sure.
So, you know, creativity. There should never be a leash on it. There should never be a governor on it. When and in the context of, it doesn't mean you have to do every idea that comes to your mind, but think it out, right? Think it through. Dream. I bet. I guess what I'm saying is
Sure.
that I think far too many people don't dream, but that's really where I think a lot of stuff manifests from, is it's an idea or a concept, right? I mean, this Zoom that we're talking on right now. Someday, some dude somewhere said, you know what? This would be useful,
Yeah.
and it started as an idea or in his or her head, and here we are actually having a discussion from, you know, many miles away. So creativity, obviously, I know is one of your first prongs.
Mhm.
Sorry to cut you off to
No,
spend a
no,
little
no,
more time on
totally.
that one because it's an important one. But please continue in some of the other, the other C's that are part of your formula.
Sure. Well, the next one that's part of the formula we touched on a little bit, it's collaboration. Collaboration to me, it's that moment when, for example, you're brainstorming and you go, "This is my idea." And somebody else goes, "Oh, yeah. And here's what I can add to it. And here's how," and then we build something together. We all have different strengths. I mentioned that before. And so did you, that we all do have different strengths. We can bring that collaborative effort to figuring out how we can do things together. My strengths are not your strengths are not my strengths, but together we can build something really wonderful and stable. That only works if we do it together. So I encourage, anytime I do a workshop or presentation, I encourage the people I'm communicating with to look at it from that perspective of, it's okay if I don't know the answer because somebody else might, and together we can do it. There's a wonderful book by Daniel Coyle called The Culture Code that I highly recommend. It's all about how groups work together beautifully. And so he went through and studied successful groups for a number of years, and he did this wonderful they did this wonderful experiment where they had a bunch of MBAs, a bunch of college seniors, and a bunch of kindergartners all try to build a structure together to see who could build the highest structure. And all they had to work with was like toothpicks and cotton balls and a couple of pieces of paper. And surprisingly, the kindergartners were the ones who did the best because they just collaborated. They didn't overthink. They didn't try to, I'm better at this than you are. None of that. There was no ego
No
involved. They
ego.
just worked together. Exactly. So when we collaborate, when we are in pure collaboration together, we're in that space of being able to build on each other's strengths in a way that will be more stable and also will be more forward thinking.
I think that's amazing. I think to me, I feel like you hit the nail on the head there with the word ego, right? And that can often be a governor
Mm,
of collaboration, right? You get a group of people in a room. First, let's talk about creativity. Getting everyone to contribute their ideas so they feel that they're a part and parcel of the conversation, not
mhm,
just maybe the one with an ego, right? When you're talking about an organization, and then from a collaborative perspective. I do feel that sometimes in certain situations, some personalities can be stronger than others, and that can thwart collaboration. And it's interesting
mm.
that you use the example of a child because those egos aren't quite as developed yet, I think, and they're there having a good time and being creative, and they're able to build the tallest the tallest tower there. So that's phenomenal. So collaboration, falling off creativity, and then where does it go from there?
Well, it's interesting because what you just said really sparked something in me. When we have this last prong, compassion, in that collaborative situation, we make room for those people who aren't the loud talkers. You put me in a room, I'm a talker, right? I'm going to be to everybody. And I did this thing once. I went to a festival I was going to be teaching at, and I decided that I was going to not say anything about myself at all. Instead, I was just going to be curious about other people and have compassion for who they were. And you cannot believe how many people that whole week were telling me what an incredible conversationalist I was. I didn't say anything, right? I was just listening. I was just curious and I was just compassionate. So when we make room for compassionate room for the other people in our groups in our lives, and we can bring that facet to the situation, then they get to shine. And we are not diminished by them shining. We just all shine brighter together. So there's a lot of that to me that's really important. But the other part of compassion that I think is so crucial for us to think about, a lot of people talk about do what you love. And I love that. I do. I think it's great. But I go a little bit differently. I think about do what you care about. Because what you care about can be something that is really challenging, that may be hard to love. I'm huge in, again, environmentalism and also animal welfare and anti-poaching. It's a lot of the things that I pay attention to and do. And guests that I have on my podcast, for example, are all people like that. So it's hard to love. It's easy to love the animals. It's very hard to love and poachers or poaching. So I look at it like, what do I care about? What can I be compassionate about? And that's what drives me more than what I love about it, because I want to help where I can. And that is one of the most important things that we can do, is if we figure out what it is we care about in the situation, then we can bring our best to it. And I say that to people a lot, especially when you're in a for example, in a job that you're not really crazy about, and you don't have the opportunity to leave yet or to modify it yet.
Mhm.
Okay, you may not be able to love it, but can you find what you love about it?
About it.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what that compassion can do for you, is you find what you care about it. And then the last part of compassion is you have to show compassion to yourself, and we have to remember we're all beings, we're all people, and one of the things we can do that's best is not just show compassion for others, which of course is important, but also show compassion to ourselves. Figure out when you are not happy, when you are having challenges, and accept them, and figure out what you can do about it right now. And I always tell my clients to say this to themselves: what is one small thing I can do right now to improve this situation? It doesn't have to be big, but if it's something, your perspective will change, and that will change things down the line in ways you can't even imagine.
That's amazing. I love the compassion piece. I mean, the first two are phenomenal, and but without the third, I feel like that really sort of rounds out your formula, as we'll call it. Because compassion, I think, is something that is often left out in so many instances in people's personal lives, as well as their business, especially in business. Right? It's
Mm,
all about business, right?
mhm.
And it can tend to lack that compassion, and it's such an amazing quality in an individual. And you talked about that example of where you were at a conference, I believe, and you just made it about everybody else. It reminds me of that book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and
And
Influence
influence
People.
people. Mm.
And he's talked about that. He talks about just taking interest in other people and having compassion for other people, and how, as you actually eloquently stated, as he does in the book, that people will be like, wow, you were an incredible conversationalist, because that person was talking about themselves the entire time, right? And because you took interest and you took compassion in them, and it's true, and as talkers, right? As we both have own microphones. That could be hard, right? To kind of pipe up and use the two ears and one mouth methodology that our parents always told us, to make a difference. So I think compassion is such a huge component of it, and I appreciate you sharing that. So now you take this formula, right, which is phenomenal, and tell us a little bit about how you've made impacts with individuals and businesses, and some of the work that you've done. Some of the, I mean, you got a very impressive resume of some big names. Go ahead, drop the names of these businesses that you've worked with to do this. It's incredible.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to say something right now, Derek. You foster such a sense of curiosity. I can feel it right now. You're just curious, and you are so open and giving with your time and your energy. I just want to stop right now and just say I really appreciate that. That's
Oh,
amazing.
thank you. Oh, thank you. I
So
appreciate that.
it's wonderful. I love it. I love it. One of the, of course, NASA was one of the things that changed my life forever. Working there was amazing. One of the things that I did, in addition to teaching these workshops with science, is I got to actually teach scientists how to make what would normally be considered something dry into something fun.
Mm,
Right. So
hard to
so
do.
yeah, it can be, but yet at the same time, like I had this one scientist I was working with. She was asked to go and speak in front of her school of all of the sixth graders in a school. She was terrified, and so she said, "You know how to do this. Teach me." So I got to teach her how to make volcanology. She's a volcano expert. Really exciting. And she went and she did it. She rocked it. And here's what's cool. She went from being a research scientist, and she said that whole thing changed her life. And she went from being a research scientist to now she's a professor at a university in the DC area. She's like, I want to teach. And it changed everything because it unlocked her ability. So
Hmm.
the opportunity to do that for scientists at NASA, to get them excited about their stuff and to get it so that they can relate it in really fun ways, was amazing. One of the most recent things that I got to do that I loved, I got to work at Spotify corporate, And we were talking about, they asked me to do actually a podcast. So it was kind of like me talking to you, except for I didn't see anybody. It was just me on a screen. And I got to talk to them about mindful creativity and how they, a lot of whom are engineers who work at Spotify, we think of Spotify as very creative, as in just artistic, but it's creative in the engineering field as well, because they're doing this incredible programming. And so they wanted that mindful creativity to be something that the engineers were aware of, that they could infuse their creativity with mindfulness and infuse their mindfulness practice, if they had it, with a sense of creativity and play, so that they could then again be more available for those creative sparks and also be able to apply them in the work that they did and even in the rest of their lives, because I think mindfulness is wonderful in any direction, especially though when we apply it to that compassion and that collaboration so that we can access creativity and all make something amazing together.
That's awesome because I've had the opportunity to prior to owning my own businesses, I worked in the corporate world, like many of us, right? We sort of wore the corporate hat. We worked for different companies and organizations and various different leadership roles and sales roles, and we would have folks come in to try, and give speeches, give talks to try to improve us as individuals. Never did and I worked for some big companies that had big budgets, brought in some big time speakers, but never did we ever have anybody come in and teach us this art of mindfulness
Mm,
and creativity as a way to then collaborate with the others on the team to to build something better. It was never about that. It was about
mm,
work harder, motivation. This guy climbed this mountain, he's awesome, you should work harder. And okay, that's cool, makes for a great talk, but it was never mindfulness is such a huge thing, right? I mean, in creativity being part and parcel and I think together with
mhm,
mindfulness is such a skill set that I think is never taught to us
mm,
at any level in school, college. It's not often, for me, it wasn't until I hit a wall in my life where I realized that I wasn't doing any work up here.
mm,
And that's when mindfulness was unlocked for me. And that just unlocked so many things in
mm,
professional life, love life, everything, family, kids, all of it. So the fact that you're using that in your practice is amazing. And I really wish that if I could redress the way traditional schooling was done, they
mm,
don't have any classes on teaching people how to be mindful, right? And the
mm.
practice of mindfulness. So I just, tipping my hat that I'm not wearing at the moment to you. I think that's fantastic. So,
Thank you. I
um,
appreciate that.
so where, I mean, incredible journey in your life. You've written some great books, which we'll have in the show notes for everyone to take a look at. Where are you looking to take your business and to take what you're doing? Like, where are we going from here? What's next for you in your journey?
Oh, wow. That's a really good it's a good question. One of the things that I'm looking to do is I want to take I work with a lot of colleges and universities. I speak at a lot of business schools and law schools, places like that, sort of priming the next generation of people who are going to be entrepreneurs and business owners and working in the corporate and non-corporate world. And I want to do even more of that because I love working with people who are open to learning. And at the same time, it's growing more and more that I'm doing more. I was doing a number of speaking gigs during COVID when I was, like all of us, we were all virtual, if you will, we're
Virtual.
all online.
Mhm.
But I'm doing more of that and getting so that we can get companies and organizations more into that place of being collaborative and compassionate and creative together. And then part of it is my focus a lot of the time is towards the goal. Like what is your goal as a company? What is your goal as an organization? And if I say so myself, and I have to because it's coming from me, my focus is always, and how can we then benefit others as part of the work we do? So whatever it is the focus is, my work always is going to be with that, through that lens of how can we take what we've done and make it better for those who have not yet benefited. So as an example, I'm going to give you a middle school example, which is really fun. So we were doing a water quality study with a bunch of kids, and we went to it's not the Potomac. All of a sudden, I can't remember the name of the other river in DC. Oops. Starts with an A, I think. Doesn't matter. Anyway, we were going to the river, and there were a bunch of homeless men who were already hanging out on the river where we were going to be 66th graders were going to be going. And I came early and I handed out $5 bills to the homeless guys. And I said, guys, we're going to have a bunch of sixth graders running around taking water pH and water temperature readings. Can you be cool? And they're like, yeah, whatever. And so the sixth graders come, they're doing their work, everything's exciting. And then the homeless guys start asking questions of the kids, and the kids start relating why the water pH of the river is important, why knowing the temperature is important, like depending on what kind of fish there are. And one of the homeless guys was there going, yeah, I see fish, sometimes they're not there and sometimes they are there on the river, so it's really cool that you're doing this. And they ended up teaching the homeless gentleman about the science they were doing, so
Hmm,
they were benefiting not just themselves by the learning, they were benefiting people who otherwise would not have ever learned this stuff. So we
that's
can
awesome.
take what we know and apply it to the greater whole, to the greater world, to changing the trajectory of where we're going, if you will, to saving the planet, to helping endangered species, to whatever it is that your goal is. As long as compassion is at its base, then we can really make some substantive changes in how we live together on this big blue marble.
I love it. It's such a huge goal and a huge undertaking, and I think most would look at that and go, I can't make a spattering of a difference, but it's not true. I mean, any difference you make, that one you speak with the homeless gentleman at the edge of the riverfront, that's making a difference. Is it does
Absolutely.
it adds up, it compounds over time, right? And as people
Absolutely.
learn your lessons and they learn and understand the three C's and they apply it with that baseline foundation of compassion, as you said, and I think that really is the foundation for change, and something that is most definitely needed. We didn't talk about that, but I think it's pretty obvious. You look at our planet, we are in need of making some massive changes if we want to keep this big blue marble, a big blue marble.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So much of it is that 4.5 billion years from now, the sun will do what it does, and Mercury, Venus, and Earth, and possibly even Mars will cease to exist when the sun becomes a red giant. Okay, but that's 4.5 billion years from now. What we need
we
to
got
be
some
concerned
time.
with, right? But we can be concerned with what's going on right now. We can make changes, and any choice you make to do something differently has ripple effects you have no idea about. So, in my mind, it's so important that we do that, that we think about how, there's a brand called Seventh Generation, which is based on you do everything based on what people 7 generations after you, how they will be affected by what you do. And we don't know how what we do now can have these amazing ripple effects 5 years down the road or even tomorrow. But it reminds me of that starfish story, that the guy who was putting the starfish back in the water, and the gentleman says, why are you doing this? You can't possibly change these. There are hundreds of starfish. And he goes, yeah, but it made a difference to that one. And that's the point, is that it made a difference. If you can make a difference in one person's life by showing them compassion when you might otherwise not, you never know what kind of incredible changes you can bring about by that one act.
Beautifully said. Nothing more for me to comment on that because you nailed it. I mean, with everything that you said. So I've got two final questions for you. First, where can people find you? Businesses, individuals that want to take advantage of your services and your books, all of it. How do we get in contact with you?
Well, thank you for asking that. I appreciate that, Derek. You can find me at izoldat.com, IZOLDAT.com. I'm at Izolda T just about everywhere: LinkedIn, Instagram, uh, who else? Twitter, all of those. So you can just search on at Izolda T, you will find me. If you, we haven't talked about, yeah, how do I put this? Just Izolda will bring up some questionable movie stars from Eastern Europe. So make sure you put the T in. Uh,
Glad
so
you disclosed that.
Yeah. It didn't used to be a popular name, but now it's become a popular name. And a
Mm.
lot of it are as I said, uh, just so you know. So go put the T at the end. And that's the best, that's the that's the best way to find me. You can find out all about the books. You can find out all about the workshops that I do and the work that I'm doing with companies, organizations, and people.
Amazing. All right. And we will make sure for those who are listening, we will put the appropriate links in the show notes, and we'll put it on her dedicated webpage, on our webpage about this podcast, so people can get right to the right spot, not the other one that you mentioned. So, all right. So last question. So we've been talking
Yes.
for about an hour. We've covered a great number of things,
Mm.
tons of valuable information for people to take with them and to step into their lives and to start to make a difference and to change some things about them or those around them. Uh, what would be one thing, one nugget, if someone could just take one thing from this podcast today, forget everything else that you said and just walk away with one thing that you feel is probably the most powerful? And it doesn't have to be something you mentioned, it could be something you didn't. What would that one nugget be to help them become the absolute best version of themselves?
Wow. Small question again. One nugget. It's something I say to myself every morning. And I will say, yeah, it's be bold, be creative, be kind.
I love it. I think that sums up everything that what you do and what you're all about. Say it one more time for me.
Sure, be bold, be creative, be kind.
It's beautiful. It's like the three C's wrapped up in one sentence. Thank
that's
you.
that's that's it.
Thank you so much, Izolda. I really greatly appreciate the time you took out to speak with us. I encourage anyone who's listening who want to get in contact with her to check out the webpage, check out her social media. I'll have all her information so you have an opportunity to connect here with Izolda and work with her and all the great things that she's doing. Thanks again so much for coming on.
Thank you, Derek. I really appreciate it. I had a wonderful time.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Adapt You podcast today. Our goal with this show and all of our content is to deliver you the guests and the respective knowledge necessary to help you change something in your life. Everyone who listens to this show has something they want to affect and something they want to change. And our goal is to help give you the knowledge necessary to take you down that path on becoming the absolute best version of yourself. If you like what you heard today, please tune in to all of our shows and also check us out in social media. You can find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and check out our website and have some great content on there as well. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next show.